Welcome to Rooted Resilience, where we explore narratives of current and contemporary Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ creatives living on colonized Nipmuc, Nonotuck, and Pecumtuck land, also known as Western Massachusetts. I'm Luke, your host for today's bonus episode. Today, we'll bring you a conversation between myself and project co-director M and our colleague Cassandra Holden, who is the executive director of BOMBYX Center for Arts and Equity. BOMBYX is a nonprofit organization established to steward the property at 130 Pine Street in Florence, Massachusetts, a historic gathering place founded by abolitionists who championed anti-slavery, gender equity, and religious tolerance. Carrying these values forward, BOMBYX serves our community as a venue for transformative arts experiences, spiritual growth, and challenging conversations. With Cassandra at its helm, BOMBYX has been a dedicated ally to the Rooted Resilience project since the very beginning, serving as our project's fiscal sponsor and enabling us to apply for the grant that made this project and our podcast possible. Beyond funding, Cassandra has also been a mentor, providing advice and resources along the way. We were also so grateful for the opportunity to host our launch event this past March at BOMBYX and partner with Cassandra, her incredible team, and an organization that brings so much to our community. If you're someone who is working on a creative project or a community-driven one like ours, listen in, as Cassandra has a lot of valuable information to share for organizers like you. We hope you enjoy. You heard about this project and you were like,
we got to do this.
Yeah. Tell us about why you were interested at all in what we were kind of showing to you.
So, having been in the arts in the Valley for a long time, and in particular in the music business for about a decade, one of the things that was important to me as part of the work at BOMBYX was bringing in other voices, bringing in other curation, because while I'm, probably fine in that role, I have an eye to bringing in some things that, are outside of my own experience. That isn't really the most authentic way to approach it. Really, the way we get representation in our community, in our creative spaces, is to have our creatives bring their projects into those spaces and invite their collaborators into those spaces. And then we get something that's actually more genuine, more authentic, and perhaps more challenging. And both of you are connected to people and connected to projects and all kinds of exciting things going on that I'm not connected to. And other folks who are determining the arts and culture that's brought into this valley might not be connected to, right? So it's so important that you do this work, that you surface these stories, these dialogues, because otherwise they exist underneath the public consciousness, and we need to be aware of them. It's a fine line to hold those relationships, because those are powerful relationships, and some of the choices those curators are making are interesting and, also beyond my experience. Then I learn from that. But again, we need a broader set of humans doing that work. We need to be painting with more colors than that. And that's why your project is really interesting. And, I've also been working with Wilder in a number of interesting ways to bring, again, different voices into the space and a different perspective on, what does joy look like? What are these different stories that we can share? How do we understand one another more deeply?
I feel like one of the things that drew us to you and to BOMBYX was like, well, one, I think like the global perspective that you see through the performances and things that you have going on, but also the local perspective that's, truly feels very representative and inclusive of a lot of different communities in a really beautiful way that, again, you don't see everywhere. And that's something that we were really drawn to in what you do, and seeing kind of the energy, harmony there was something that we were really excited about, and being able to approach you as a fiscal sponsor and partner.
One of the things that has been important from the beginning with BOMBYX is that we treat our local performers the same way that we do our nationally or internationally touring artists. Like everyone gets good production, everybody gets food. The staff is incredibly attentive, and it's not a DIY space. Like we really want to elevate all of the projects that are coming through, right? So sometimes that might mean thinking more expansively of like how to incorporate lighting or projection or video or, some other elements into a smaller project to make it more expansive and more meaningful. And that's a really interesting dimension of the work, because what I have experienced over many years in the artist community is a sort of assumption of poverty, that, folks are trying to keep projects small because they can, they have a budget that's small, and thinking about, how to bring in other resources, whether that's through grants or relationships with a donor or other kind of sponsor. And so doing this fiscal agent work actually, it's a double win, because it enables the creatives that we work with to access additional resources, and also means that because we can access those resources, like we can level up the production. We can create something that is more expansive, and it's not just like, how can I do like the smallest, tiniest thing with these few dollars? But instead turn that inside out, and it's like, how can we touch the most hearts in the course of a project?
Yeah, and I think that, I had some prior experiences of collaborating with you, and part of what drew me to you and BOMBYX was just your creativity and your openness, right? The sky was really the limit. The desire to really cheerlead and support and center and uplift in all of the ways you possibly could with what you had at hand was really clear and apparent. And I don't think Luke and I quite knew how beautiful it would be. I think we knew it was going to be good. But as you're talking about how you really work to level the playing field around productions, I think of our opening celebration. And I think of how different it would have been had we done it somewhere else. It would have been a really different experience for Luke and I, and for the people who were on that stage, and for the people in the audience too. It provided a really beautiful container for something that was really important to make space for, on all the levels, for all of the reasons. And it all magically ran even without you there.
Right? This is the beauty of the team, like this incredible people that I get to work with. They take such gentle care, and they're also super creative. So, they will meet with artists, and the first, second, and third questions are like, what would you like to do? How could we make that bigger? Did you consider that we could do this other completely different magical sparkly thing? And they just run with it. And it's such a joy to be part of that, from just as an audience member to experience that, but also to just be held by this group of people that I know are going to do that, and not have to be responsible for every good idea. Like, everyone has some amazing ideas, and it's just sort of exponentially more exciting than if it were all up to me.
And the kindness is a really key factor in all of this. When I think of all of the things that Luke and I have encountered, both in being like, Cassandra, could you ... via email, to even the night of the production when we had some unexpected requests around instruments, or any of the conversations that I had with the individuals who were working the front door. Everybody was just so kind in a moment when Luke and I were like, this is amazing and overwhelming.
Yeah, I feel incredibly fortunate. Again, like this is the team, and that's the thing they love to do, is to take care of people, both, in the sort of human needs. Do you have water? Have you been fed? Like, do you need a sweater? But also the creative needs, like just making sure that everyone feels at home. And that's not necessarily the norm in the production world. It can feel very transactional sometimes. And of course, there are costs involved, and humans need to get paid for the work that they do. And that is also there. That's not invisible. But that doesn't have to be front and center. And what I hope as the organization, continues to grow and we continue to do this work, is it's just to get even better at that. We keep learning with each new project that comes in, and just approaching that with a certain humility, and also like having some tools for repair or correction when we screw up, because we're not perfect. And, inadvertently we may say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or not tune into a need or desire that somebody has, or someone can just have a hard day and, we showed up in front of them, or our team can have had like the worst day ever. And, but like, how can we develop a paradigm of being in space together and being in creativity and working through anything that does arise?
I wonder if you will now allow us to sort of back you into like the roots of BOMBYX.
The roots of BOMBYX, sure. Mm-hmm. So the name BOMBYX comes from Bombyx mori, which is the name of the silk moth that was imported into this area in the early 19th century by a group of radical abolitionists with this idea that they were going to reject slave-grown cotton and import silk moths and mulberry trees to the region so that they could raise these little moths and they could spin silk and they could make cloth, and therefore not have to bring up southern grown cotton. At the same time, there was an initiative to launch a sugar beet farming operation, again, rejecting the slave grown sugar to create a new sweetener. So the name BOMBYX is really at this intersection of arts and ecology and economy. And so that's what the project is about for me. It's like, how are we bringing together the creative and the economic and this deep connection to the land and the history there? All of those things are a learning process, but they're not separate. I think there has long been this idea that like creative process is separate from spirit, and to be valid or to be pure, it somehow has to also be separate from money. When in fact, as a creative human, you do need to support yourself. So, economy is built in there. It's not divorced from that. And yet, like, how can we develop healthy paradigms for that? I'm not saying that we have the answers for that. I'm saying that we have launched what I hope will be like, a centuries-long experiment to figure that out, which will evolve. When the Florence Congregational Church was founded in 1861, it was radical in its moment. Women had full voting membership in the congregation, which was highly unusual. The congregation was dedicated to anti-slavery, and it actually took 9 Christian denominations to come together and found that place. So these ideas of, gender equity and racial equity and religious tolerance were baked into what was happening there. Understanding that's through an 1860s lens, and we understand those things differently today than folks did 160 years ago. But I think that's also a reminder that like movements are slow. These conversations and the evolution of our thinking and doing and being around those things, will probably not be solved in a generation. This is probably really slow and important work. And the project is to begin. The project is not to complete it, but just to march on, to do the next thing that we are capable of doing. Yeah, and I have had the privilege of launching this thing, and I can share that story, but I have never intended to be the founder who dies at her desk. My job is to get the plane in the air, and then there will be someone who comes after me who looks at the work that I've done and says, that was cool, but here are the 7 other things that I think we could be doing that are interesting, and here are the 3 things I want to cleave off, and it will continue to evolve. It should. I mean, if at some point it becomes ossified and it has a very like strict and rigid way of being in the world, then it's dead. Then it needs to go to sleep and come back as something else.
What happened with the silkworms?
The silkworms. Okay. So, oh my gosh, I always get the name of this organization wrong. The Northampton Association for, I'm going to just call it the Northampton Association because it's like industry, arts, and education, but the order of which I always get wrong. Anyway, the Northampton Association, they founded a cooperatively owned silk mill. They were around for about 4.5 years. That project was part of sort of a national and international sort of utopian movement. So this, we think of the 60s as the time when people lived on communes and, explored ideas of shared economy and shared other things. And this was also what was happening in the 1840s. And what we've learned from both of those experiences is that's a hard community to hold together. So the project fell apart after just a few years. And then the church, which we inhabit, was built at the beginning of the Civil War in 1861.
I do think we want to understand the origin story a little bit from the perspective of like who you are. We know you as Cassandra, executive director of BOMBYX, and a whole lot of fun to hang out with. But there's more. There's like more behind all of that. There's more preceding the day the BOMBYX opened.
Yes. I have a meandering career, which is that I started out in fashion and I loved that. I did custom clothing for a long time and costume design and really enjoyed that. And then came to a point where I felt like I wanted to do something more enduring. I was making beautiful things for people who could afford them, and it was creative, and I had a great team, and it also felt ephemeral. It also felt, and maybe this was because this was around the time that I lost my father about 20 years ago. I began thinking about legacy and like, if I died tomorrow, what, not like I have to make my mark on the world, but like, would it have made a difference? Like, for all the time I'd been on earth, like, would anything positive have happened other than like, I made a whole bunch of people look good? Not that that's a bad goal. There are amazing designers in this world, and that's all well and good. So I went back to school and I finished my BA, and I was fortunate enough to get a grant from Smith. Helen Gurley Brown had just started this new grant program at Smith called the Magic Grant. So I got this grant to make a mobile with a group of students at the Care Center in Holyoke. So we made this 20-foot metal mobile that hangs over at HCC at the Kittredge Center. And it really got me thinking about working at scale. And so after being an artist in residence and completing that project with them, I was on staff for a little while. And the Care Center as an organization did this really intense, like internal self-reflective process and identified that what the students really we were doing a great job of helping students like complete their high school education. But then, many of these young women, all of whom have children, were really struggling once they moved on to college because the project of getting your kiddo to daycare and getting yourself to class without a car and, God forbid anyone gets sick or anything like that, and many of them were struggling with housing issues, was that we needed to provide housing and we needed the supports that that were being provided at the high school, level of education, like all the way through completion of your, associate's or bachelor's degree. So what that meant is that like for the next decade, I had the incredible honor of working with the Care Center to develop Roque House, which is this affordable housing project supporting young families that has an art center on the ground floor and affordable housing above, which was like totally different, like understanding that, human beings in affordable housing, like have inherent dignity and need a space to be creative, and so do their kids. And that just launched this part of my career where, in addition to that project, I was also working with Wayfinders. They're the largest nonprofit affordable housing developer in the state, to bring public art into affordable housing. So thinking about if you go to New York, for example, every swanky apartment building has it's Warhol, it's de Souvero, it's whatever. It's very expensive piece of art in the lobby that conveys that you're somewhere important and that everyone who lives there is important. And so I really wanted to flip that. And by bringing art into these affordable housing spaces, convey that the people who live there are important and, deserving of joy. Like that's your birthright. That's not like that's not dessert. That's the main dish. So I spent many years doing that and loved that, and then transitioned into doing event production. both concerts and festivals in the region. And then BOMBYX grew out of that because everything shut down in the pandemic. It was a very, very sad time. And it was the summer of 2019. Priscilla Ross, who's one could consider her the sort of unofficial mayor of Florence, she had been the music director at the Florence Congregational Church for about a decade. And she knew that the congregation there was getting older and that they weren't able to keep up with the building. It was too much. That congregation was getting smaller year over year. And yet they didn't want to just sell it to a developer. It was very clear to the congregation that they wanted the property to remain a community resource and a gathering space and a creative space for the community. So she got together a group of us and we started forming a board and writing bylaws and do all the things that you do when you want to form a nonprofit. And then along came 2020. And she works in healthcare and, whatever, spring, summer of 2020, she looked at me, she said, I can't really do this project. Do you want it? And I said, hell no. Like we weren't gathering in the summer of 2020. Like humans were not in rooms together. And the last thing I wanted was a gathering space. I was like, that is the fastest way to lose money on the planet. That's the dumbest idea ever. So I walked away from it. And then the building just started haunting me. She started showing up in my dreams. And every time I drove by, like some wild thing would happen with the light. Like the clouds would open and there would be this like ray of light. I'd like, I'm not looking at you. No, I'm not doing this. And it just kept happening over and over again. So in January of 21, I reached out to the congregation. I said, okay, like, I'm not saying yes, let's restart the conversation. So, I brought in an architect and began to really thoroughly look at the building. Yeah, but the building won because, in September we demolished, we did a whole transformation of the stage and then we opened in October of 2021. Yeah. I lost. I surrendered. It's the best thing I ever did. The building is alive. I know that sounds very woo, but if you're there for any period of time, the building has a spirit. 160 years of people singing and praying and putting good energy into that building is real. It's powerful. It's not sweet and nice. Pastor Marissa calls it the bright light of BOMBYX. Like that energy is about change. That energy wants things. It's not subtle. And here I am.
I just felt it in the audience the night of our launch event. Something was generated in the space.
And artists remark on that all the time. There's an energy that you can feel. It comes up through the stage in the sanctuary. It like goes back and forth between who's ever on stage and, who's sitting in the audience. It moves around the building. Like, it's not like, ooh, scary ghost. It's this really powerful transformational energy. And I feel like my job is to shepherd it. Like I'm not directing it. I'm just holding the container. It wants people, it wants ideas, it wants creative stuff to happen in there. Cause that it's almost like a resonator, right? It's amplifying that. Like what you bring to the space, it will sort of amplify isn't even, it's like, it will bolster that. It will make that stronger and it will make that vibration more potent. And sometimes that feels really good. And sometimes that actually feels really challenging. We did a sound bath with Omar Sosa and Tim Erickson back in October. And it felt like they were summoning spirits. Like stuff was moving around the room. It was not a sweet, we're going to lull you into meditation situation. It was another thing entirely. It was cool. And it was intense.
Maybe a little bit differently than advertised.
Well, I mean, we sort of turned those two loose and anything could have happened. Yes.
Yeah, I can understand that energetic. I have a very clear embodied memory of opening the space for ritual. And I've been in a lot of ritual spaces in my life with a lot of powerful groups who are deeply rooted in ancestral traditions. And there was a very particular moment that I was like, oh. I could just like feel the whole thing just drop, like in a really anchor way. And there was just no question in the moment. It was like whatever's coming through is coming through. And I'm just like, I'm here, So it is a very strong, energetic.
Feels like a big responsibility sometimes. It doesn't feel heavy necessarily, but it does feel like a lot. Not bad a lot. Like interesting for the rest of my life a lot. But I'm not going to die at my desk. I won't. No, but I'm going to get something. I'm getting something going. And, who knows what my relationship will be to that in 10 years or 20 years. It feels important, and I don't imagine that I would be wholly disconnected from it, but I don't need to be in this role forever.
We haven't asked a really concrete question of what is fiscal sponsorship, right? We don't want to assume that everybody understands. And I think that there is probably a connection there to like, what is happening in these times and how are you seeing that impact the creatives that you work with daily?
Before the national dumpster fire that we're now calling arts funding, BOMBYX had started dipping a toe into the waters of fiscal sponsorship or fiscal agent work, which is, for those who are unfamiliar with it, there are many resources that are available to artists for projects through that type of partnership. As a nonprofit, we can receive grant funds, we can receive tax-deductible donations from donors and other entities that would not be available to solo artists that don't have that nonprofit status. There's a whole conversation we could have about gatekeeping and nonprofit status and how money moves through our economy. And my takeaway from being in that world is that we as an organization have a responsibility to do everything that we can to move money toward artists to resource their projects. That comes back to our commitment to bringing other curators and other voices into our spaces, and the abundance thinking that we're trying to shift to, which is not take the smallest amount of money possible and make the tiniest project you can, but how can we move more resources to create the biggest, brightest, sparkliest, coolest, most moving thing. So the way that works would be, let's say, for example, Rooted Resilience received a grant. Mass Humanities, who awarded you this funding, then directs that money to BOMBYX, and then we manage that for you. You send us invoices, and we pay various people who are involved in creating your project. We take a small fee to do that covers the administrative costs of doing that. But it means that you and other creatives have access to so many more resources, right? And it's been a game changer. We started out with just a couple of things and smaller amounts of money, and we've been able to do like more and more of that work, which has really changed what's being offered in our space. I think it's also important to say that because money is changing hands, relationship is really important. Like, we don't just enter into those agreements with artists that we don't know, with whom we haven't worked, with whom we haven't had like conversation and relationship and built trust. Just in any relationship, whether that's a friend or a romantic partnership, being able to talk about money is super important in a way that isn't like charged. And I mean, we all have our own stuff around money. Like, money is essentially energy in a certain way. We try to be really clear in our communication around that, and also, make the process not super onerous. I mean, there are fiscal agent options out there with massive contracts that go on for days that stipulate, that you have to do all kinds of things. So for us, it's finding that balance of, a process that protects both entities, and creates a lot of clarity, and an understanding that we will be in dialogue throughout the project. And the money is just one part of it. Like, moving the resources is part of it, but we also often will work together on PR. We will also, collaborate in shaping projects sometimes. It's entering into a creative partnership, and money is just one piece of that. And I should say too that like there are a range of experiences within that. There are definitely projects that received like one small donation, and so we cut one small check to do the thing that they had said that they would do, and that, it's short and sweet, and we don't have an enduring relationship. Your project has been, one that has endured, and we've had an opportunity to do events together, and we're collaborating on PR. So it can be, it can be short and sweet, or it can be a more engaged and long process.
I don't think it's always obvious to people. I mean, part of this is also just dependent on your network, but I don't think it's always obvious to people who possible fiscal sponsors are or how to get to that moment in time, right? And so what I hear you saying is it's relationship, and I also know, and I'm not real sure if you said it explicitly, but it's also value alignment, right? And I think that is like the mystery ingredient that people can be left with, not knowing in this kind of a scenario, because they're just like, well, is it a business transaction? And do I just need to have somebody who wants 10% of my grant, or is it someone I can really work with and lean into? And I'm sure there are all different flavors.
Yes.
And, I think that what you portrayed is very accurate to our experience in many ways, and was more than I was expecting, honestly. I mean, I was just grateful that somebody was willing to stand up for us and say, yes, I believe in this project and I will receive the money to be able to work with them so that they can do this work. I didn't necessarily expect all of the collaborative conversations and cheerleading and openness and willingness to be like, how do we get this out to more people?
We're learning in this process too. As I said, we've definitely worked with artists for whom, it is transactional. They're very clear about what they want, and that's a perfectly fine relationship. That is okay. And it's also, I find, more rewarding to work with projects like you guys where, there's more engagement. We get to do more interesting things together. And that collaborative creative potential, again, is greater than the sum of its parts. I do want to go back a moment in time and talk about the mission alignment piece, because I think that's really important for artists who are looking for that fiscal sponsor relationship. I mean, it happens that we're an arts organization and we're committed to bringing diverse voices to our spaces, but that doesn't mean that only arts organizations are the right fit for a particular project. For example, if you were doing a project around food, you might consider a nonprofit that's doing work around food justice. If you're doing work around housing, maybe there's a housing entity that would be the right partner. Again, it's really about like relationship and thinking about how to be in partnership with another entity and what you need out of that relationship. That might be marketing. That might be, for example, if you were working with a housing entity, there's an opportunity to do projects in their spaces. That could be really cool. So thinking expansively, because what the fiscal agent relationship opens up is not only finance. Like that's the most obvious and transactional part of it, but it's actually bigger than that. It's a way to scale up. I think, it's a tool. And I've said this in other ways in this conversation, like artists are often encouraged to make their work small, right? Like, can it fit on a table? Can it fit in your studio? Like, do you have to buy a lot of equipment to do your podcast? Where are you going to have rehearsal space if you're doing a performance? And this is like, these relationships are a way of turning that inside out, because there's more than just the financial resources that come into play in creative partnership.
Is your view of this changing at all? Or maybe not changing, but are there things that you're thinking about in adapting or strategies to share?
Oh yeah, we're all about strategy at this moment. So we just hosted a fiscal agent training in partnership with the Community Foundation. We're rolling out a series of workshops. We have 10 on the books so far over the coming year that are about capacity building for artists. Some of that will be tethered to specific grant writing opportunities. So the grant writing workshop will focus on a specific opportunity and how to create a compelling proposal for that opportunity. We're also hoping to bring in the folks from Creative Ground, because being listed on Creative Ground, which is a regional register for creatives, is a gateway to several other funding opportunities. That's really important. We're also going to bring in a phenomenal human named Lydia Sallet Dudley, who happens to be the BOMBYX accountant and happens to be performing at Carnegie Hall next April. I know, she's whatever, multi-hyphenate. I'm like, okay, so you're going to come to BOMBYX and you're going to do like basic financial literacy workshop, because you have the right brain and the left brain. You have a life as a creative, and you have also had a career, in finance. So we need you to break down things like spreadsheets and budgets in the vocabulary that artists understand, not the vocabulary that your accountant is really familiar with. So more of that. And we have a whole slate of stuff coming, because that's the way we're going to move resources. Like it's terrifying. Funding is drying up. Or rather, it looks like that on the surface, like the things, sort of the big pockets of federal money and the way that moves through the state and local granting entities is drying up. But that doesn't mean there isn't money out there. Things like fiscal agent relationships open up resources from private donors, from businesses, from other types of entities. And so part of our mission is to empower artists to think more broadly about money, so that we can move resources through the community to the things that mean something to us. The money is there. Again, like, banish scarcity thinking. It's hard to do that because the news is terrifying and makes you want to just crawl back into bed and pull the covers up over your face and never leave. But it's an opportunity to be really creative, because I firmly believe the resources are there. We just need to find them in the places we haven't looked for them, and just develop a new tool set so we can move it around to where we need it.
Yeah, it's interesting because Assets for Artists does a series of workshops, and there's always some financial ones in there, and I've gone to a few of them. And even when I've heard it before, like maybe it's the same presenter, it still tells me something different each time. And so it's like there can never be too much financial education for creatives.
Yes.
Right? And everybody's going to present it in a slightly different way that's going to be supportive to a slightly different need that you have in that moment that you didn't have a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah. And we're thinking about how to tailor offerings, because, for example, if you're someone who makes things, objects, whether that's, you make cups, or you make paintings, or you make wood sculpture, right? Like, the way that you need to think about, documenting your income and expenses for that is different from if you're a performer, right? You don't have things, you don't have materials, but you do have other inputs that go in, and you have humans that you work with, which is really different. So that's, thinking about how do we look at the creative sector and identify the needs that are there and tailor what we're offering so that it's like the experience that you mentioned. You're like, oh, right, that piece of information that didn't resonate before, I got that. And also, like, this work is a win-win, right? Because if all the creatives go dormant for the next election cycle, that makes what's happening in my space really dull. Like, I want all of it. I want, I want all the messiness and the joy and the projects that aren't quite finished and the things that people are developing. Like, we need all of that.
I think I've definitely seen some really strong examples in the last few months of individuals and businesses stepping up to say, like, we're going to help you make that happen.
Yes. But it's also true that that's not what's happening everywhere. There's a lot of what we do here that can be a model for other communities, which is not me trying to pat myself on the back and say I'm the most original thinker. But as we approach this work collectively, we can disseminate that information out into the world. And if you're a creative living in a community that maybe doesn't have a lot of fiscal sponsorship action happening, this could be a thing where you're like, oh, all right, well, I'm going to go approach this nonprofit and see if they'll do this for me, because I've learned about this and I'm empowered to go forth, rather than waiting for someone to come to you and say, we could do this together.
So when we interview all of our creatives, we always ask them to kind of define in their own words what rooted resilience means for them in, like, whatever way. Some people are like, literally, this is I'm defining it. And then some people relate it to their experiences. But we wanted to ask you, because we ask everyone.
I actually did think about the question before I came in. I think this is true all the time, but especially in this moment, it's the notion that we need to take care of ourselves first before we can reach out and be creative and support others and be in our community in a generative way. And by taking care of ourselves first, that doesn't mean selfishness. That doesn't mean hoarding resources, but making sure that we're operating from a space of well-being and groundedness, rootedness, because it's so easy in this society, tethered to our devices with the pressures of capitalism and everything else, to just be little hamsters on the wheel, going and doing and going and doing and going and doing and wishing we got a little more sleep. And when our nervous systems become dysregulated because of that cycle, like, we're not bringing the best of ourselves to our communities, to our loved ones, to anyone, right? We're just frazzled little animals that want to bite other people. So rooted resilience is really about this, like, centering care so that we can be in the world in this healthy, generative, creative way. I think it's also important. There's a fine line, right? There's a fine line between self-care and self-centeredness. And I think it's important to be attuned to that the place that community comes into that is that's the place when you focus your attention out and you're not just caring for yourself, you're caring for others and ensuring that the environment around you is whole and good. Whereas, in the self-centered way of operating, you're always looking inward and not outward and not attending to the needs of your community. So it's important to balance both of those things because we can also be nourished by community. When community is whole and good and cares for us, that's also part of our self-care and self-nourishment.
And we need community in order to be able to enact self-care, right? We need to know that there will be people who are pillars for us in different moments. We need to be able to pay our bills. We need to know that somebody can show up to do us a favor so that we can take those 20 minutes to do the thing that's going to help us to be different.
It's been a pleasure working with both of you. I love seeing this project evolve. I'm excited that it might continue. There might be like a second season, which is awesome.
Thanks for listening. If this is your first time tuning in, we hope you enjoyed yourself. Please leave us a review or comment. It means a lot and helps support the growth of our project. Finally, this is our first season, and we're so grateful to everyone who has listened, shared, and been part of the journey so far. We could not do this without you, and we continue to need support to be able to share these voices. Visit givebutter.com/rooted-resilience to learn more about how you can support this project. Thank you for centering Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+ creatives with us. This work is more meaningful than ever as we face even steeper challenges in preserving our history for future generations.